with the next painting exercise, we'll be painting tints, shades, tones, and complements. I have labeled here on my paper tints, shades, tones, and complements. Pick one of the primary colors and do all of these 4 different color mixes using a monochromatic color scheme, and you're just going to be adding white, black, gray, and moving on then to a complementary color scheme by adding a complement. I will do my example with red, so I still have on my palette some leftover paint from my last exercise. I have the primary colors and the secondary colors, and I also put in the bottom of my tray some white and black, which I will need. So starting with red, and starting with doing my tints, which if you remember from our lecture, tint is a hue plus white. Now first I want to put just my hue down. Put my red down. And when you're working with tints, you don't want to add white to the hue because you would have to have so much white. You would end up with a huge amount of paint. So instead, start with white. So I'll take a little bit of white out of the bottom of my container and put it next to my red. And I can start making my tints. Don't forget to clean your brush with a paper towel before you put it in the water. It saves your water. I'm getting too dirty. All right, I put my first hue down, and it looks like I have a little yellow in my brush. I'm going to try to get that a little cleaner. I'll end up with an orange. Remember, I put my white right next to my hue, and I want to make the very lightest tint I can. So I will take a tiny bit of red. Red goes a long way, and mix it into my white. Remember, don't add the white to the hue or you'll end up with a whole bunch of paint, and we're just practicing. So I have a nice little pink tint. And I want to do about 6 circles, continuing to add a little bit more red as I go. Just to get a feel for how I can change the value. That was a pretty big jump. Let me put a little bit more in there. And finally, a whole bunch, but still will have a little bit of a tint to it. Shades, if you remember from the lecture, are using a hue plus black. Now this time, grab a little black, put it next to my red. This is tricky because black will definitely darken your color fast. So I do it the opposite direction this time. Instead of adding red to black, I'm going to add black to red. You always add the darker color or darker value to the lighter value when trying to mix a color to keep from having too much paint. So let's start with our straight up tint again, just to compare. Remember, not too much water. We want to get a feeling for how those acrylics go. And this time, like I said, I'll start with red. I'll put that over here. Put just a little bit of black in, see what happens. Now all blacks either have a green tone, green tint rather, no, not tint, a green hue, sorry, or a blue hue. So you'll notice as we add black to this red that it may move toward purple because I'm using a Mars black, which has a little bit of a blue hue mixed in. Watch how it gets a little darker. And we'll go even darker. And it does get black very fast. So I want to go all the way to black here. to see what my shades are. Now tones are hue plus gray. And in this case, a gray, depending on the value of the gray we make, let's make a gray. I'll make a gray in the bottom of my palette. I told you in the first video that one of your materials to have, I'm going to make a middle gray. One of your materials to have was a squirt bottle, and here's why. In our climate, it's so dry. You need to squirt your palette every now and then with a little bit of water. I've got a little one here at home, just to keep it from drying out. Make sure you don't let that water go anywhere it's not supposed to. So still using red, I want to grab a little bit of that gray off the bottom of my palette in the container. Let me get a little bit more so I have enough to do this. I'll put it next to my gray here, my red here to use to mix. Now, in this case, my gray is a little lighter than the red, so I'll do what I said and add the darker of the two to the lighter of the two. Clean off my paintbrush again, swish it around. And start with my hue and start adding a little bit of that to the gray and see what happens to get a tone. Now you can see the little bit of purple that's starting to happen. It's a pretty big jump. I feel like my gray may have been a little closer to the dark end of the scale, so I'm just jumping a little dark pretty fast. You can probably see how it's getting. And what really happens is it goes more and more towards red. You can see that purple tone there. I'll put a lot of red in there now. And I can have a nice little value chart. I might need one of these colors in my painting, so it'll be nice to have that. Now the complement, remember the complement is on the color wheel opposite. Where's that color wheel we started over here? Here. So the opposite of red is green. So I'll need to mix up a little bit of green, which I happen to have from doing the color wheel earlier. I have some green already there. So I'll start with my red hue again. Looks like I might need a little fresh red, so squeeze a little bit of fresh red out on my palette. And make sure I have enough green to do this. So let me mix up a little bit more green. My paint's drying a little. Give it a little bit of a squirt. And when I mix up the green, I start with the yellow first. Add a little bit of blue to it till I get a nice green. You don't really need more than about a quarter or a dime size. More like a dime size of the color and the paint, so we're not wasting too much paint. Let's get a nice little green going there. Mix it in nicely. All right, cleaning off my brush a little bit more. About now, my water's getting a little bit dirty. I would probably pause and clean that off, but I happen to have another jar of water over here I'll use. Make sure you keep your water clean. All right, I'll start with a little bit of red again and try to make a few steps to the complement. Now my green is the lighter of the two. I'll add just a little bit of red in my green. Let's see what happens to complement when you add its complement. It starts to get brown looking. That's about half and half. Watch what happens as I add more red. What it does is it dulls the intensity of the red. When you have green. That was where it had a little bit more. And depending on, I just want to show you because I love to play with complements. let's say I had my green a little bit darker, and watch what happens. Let's make a little bit darker green with this blue. That's a nice dark green. Now if I mix that, nice dark green, and feel free to play on your page when you're doing this. This doesn't have to be a work of art. What I want you to see is what happens when you mix the colors. Just want to put that under here so you can see how intense that is. So really I end up with it can just darken the red and dull the intensity. It makes a nice little maroon. That's the end of Tint, Shades, and Tones complement. And complements using a monochromatic color scheme up here with Tint, Shades, and Tones, and then a complementary color scheme down there with reds and greens. Now let's move on to the next exercise. This video is ending now. Make sure you clean your brushes, store your palettes, squirt a little water on it, close it up, clean your brushes like you learned from Mr. Lynn's video. Move to the next exercise.